Digital sovereignty, the new arms race every CXO must prepare for. The last few years have marked an unmistakable shift. The call for protectionism has grown louder, sharper, and more operational. We experienced early versions of this when Donald Trump first came to office, recasting global trade from cooperation to competition. Since then, China, India, and a growing list of nations have embraced their own forms of protectionism, not just in goods, but increasingly in technology. While the call for national resilience is understandable, what has escalated dramatically in recent months is the intensity of control over critical resources, digital infrastructure, and the architecture of machine intelligence itself. Digital sovereignty, once a fringe idea, is now seen as a competitive edge, a marker of survival and technological supremacy. So much so that the Statue of Liberty itself became a metaphor in a recent open letter from the CEO of Netcompay, a Europe-based technology company, calling on the continent to stand tall or risk digital dependence. What began as defensive posturing has now hardened into an aggressive global realignment, where sovereign technology infrastructure is no longer an ambition, but a precondition. The idea of sovereignty, once symbolic, is now structural. Reading these signals, I found myself reflecting on a pattern I have watched unfold steadily over the past decade. When I first entered this industry, there was a collective optimism, a belief that technology would erase borders, bridge distances, and unify humanity. Yet today, sitting at the crossroads of boardrooms, regulatory summits, and innovation hubs, it is painfully clear that the dream has not only stalled, it is reversing. The battle lines are no longer drawn on maps. They are drawn in data centers, regulatory codes, semiconductor supply chains, and algorithmic governance frameworks. Technology is no longer just a tool for progress. It has become a lever of policy, a source of national power, and increasingly, a flashpoint for conflict. Digital sovereignty is not emerging. It has already arrived. Yet even as nations rally for sovereign control, the very data centers they seek to partition remain deeply dependent on global ecosystems. A successful data center today cannot operate without a multinational foundation, from American chips to Taiwanese foundries, from European software to Indian services. Sovereignty narratives collide daily with the operational reality that the cloud itself is built across borders, not within them. Enterprises that once architected globally by default must now design regionally by necessity. Technology strategies, once optimized purely for scale and efficiency, must now absorb fragmentation, regulation, and geopolitical risk as primary design parameters. The race for technological sovereignty is no longer a future possibility. It is today's competitive reality. We at Greyhound Research believe that digital sovereignty is no longer a distant policy debate. It is a structural market force reshaping enterprise architectures, supply chains, and leadership mandates. CXOs must plan not for if sovereignty disrupts them, but for when. Sovereignty theater, the global fever spreads. While the urgency of sovereignty may have been first voiced in open letters and summit speeches, its real theater is now unfolding region by region. In the United States, the CHIPS and Science Act reframes chip manufacturing not as a market initiative, but as a matter of existential security. Export bans on AI hardware and the intensification of CFIUS scrutiny mark the U.S. government's commitment to hardening its technological borders. The recent battles around artificial intelligence have only deepened these strategic divides. Export controls on AI chips, national bans on foreign AI models, and the acceleration of sovereign AI projects in the U.S. reflect a new phase of competitive fragmentation. In China, digital sovereignty is no longer aspirational. It is deeply operational. The Great Firewall has expanded into a sophisticated AI governance regime, ensuring that only state-aligned algorithms, datasets, and infrastructure are permitted to scale. Meanwhile, in India, sovereign cloud initiatives like those emerging across sectors demonstrate how private players are increasingly responding to national localization demands, even as global hyperscalers remain embedded under sovereign wrappers. The UAE has launched sovereign AI initiatives with great ambition, even as infrastructure dependencies with US and Chinese ecosystems persist. Africa, through movements like the Smart Africa Alliance, is seeking to establish regional digital sovereignty models but remains vulnerable to external technological hegemony. Yet beneath all the rhetoric, the operational reality remains compromised. The Gaia-X project, intended as Europe's grand assertion of digital independence, has allowed U.S. cloud providers into its governance frameworks under strict conditions. As per Greyhound field notes, conversations with European CIOs across banking, manufacturing, and public sector verticals reveal a growing skepticism, a belief that Gaia-X risks becoming more of a governance forum than a viable operational platform. In truth, much of what is celebrated as sovereign achievement today rests precariously atop foreign infrastructures, imported software, and externally dependent supply chains. Digital sovereignty may increasingly raise new flags, but too often, those flags still flutter atop borrowed servers. We at Greyhound Research believe that true sovereignty will not be achieved by slogans or sovereignty badges. It will be won or lost at the level of infrastructure control, algorithmic autonomy, and enforceable regulatory independence, measures where few national initiatives today genuinely pass muster. Lofty aspirations, stark realities, the global struggle for digital sovereignty. Taking a case in point, Netcompany's CEO's vision for European technological independence, as described in his recent open letter, is not only understandable, it is admirable. And of course, he's not the first one to voice such an opinion. But the realism of achieving the proposed technological independence, given today's entrenched market dominance of American providers, is far more complicated. Despite years of debate, European technology remains heavily dependent on US cloud and software vendors. Providers like AWS, Microsoft, Google, Oracle, and Salesforce command a lion's share of Europe's cloud market, their dominance fueled by scale, ecosystem maturity, and relentless innovation velocity. That said, pockets of promise exist. Europe shows strength in cybersecurity, with names like Darktrace and Atos, and regulated, sovereignty-aligned cloud services, notably through Gaia-X, despite its visible struggles, and in industrial IoT platforms, where firms like Siemens and Bosch remain credible contenders. Edge computing, too, where proximity trumps hyperscale, offers a narrow but meaningful opportunity. Yet in Europe's bid to build digital castles, it is often foreign masons carrying the stones. Gaia-X, which originally envisioned a fully European federated cloud ecosystem, has over time diluted its purity. American firms like AWS, Microsoft, and Google Cloud have been allowed to participate under strict conditions. This pragmatic shift reflects an uncomfortable truth. Sovereignty ideals often buckle under the pressure of technological reality and market inertia. The dream of full-stack sovereignty remains daunting, not because the will is absent, but because the web of dependency runs deep. This dependency is not confined to Europe alone. As per Greyhound Field notes, similar patterns are visible in countries like India and across emerging digital economies, where efforts to localize cloud infrastructure still hinge critically on American and global hardware and software ecosystems. Running a sovereign data center at scale often requires enterprise-grade servers from firms such as Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Dell Technologies, or Cisco systems, along with critical virtualization software and management stacks. Despite the existence of open-source alternatives, these components remain heavily reliant on US commercial vendors. OpenStack, Proxmox, and other open-source frameworks offer promise, but lack the seamless turnkey maturity, broad integration support, and operational ease demanded by mission-critical environments. In truth, true end-to-end sovereignty in cloud and infrastructure remains elusive because sovereignty today is as much a supply chain problem as it is a political one. We at Greyhound Research believe that the dream of digital sovereignty demands an uncomfortable admission. True independence is impossible without systemic reinvention of supply chains, R&D investments, and ecosystem building, well beyond regulatory decrees. Pride versus pragmatism, the economic trade-offs of sovereignty. There's a seductive simplicity to the idea of technological self-reliance. But the economic trade-offs of sovereignty are neither simple nor small. Choosing locally built alternatives often comes at a premium compared to standard public cloud models. As per Greyhound Field notes, CIOs across highly regulated sectors advocate for sovereignty initiatives to strengthen resilience. Yet CFOs increasingly express concerns when sovereignty premiums threaten profitability and competitiveness. Highly regulated sectors, government services, healthcare, financial services, may willingly absorb these costs in the name of national security. But competitive sectors, where margins are paper-thin and innovation cycles are ruthless, may find themselves priced out of sovereignty unless heavily subsidized. As per Greyhound Field notes, these concerns are increasingly visible across all regions spanning Europe, India, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, where governments push for sovereign cloud and AI mandates, while enterprises quietly struggle with the financial implications. In countries like India, even as policy demands full-stack sovereignty, practical constraints, from reliance on global hardware vendors to the cost of operating sovereign-grade infrastructure, reveal the harsh reality. Sovereignty demands a financial elasticity that only a few sectors can afford. In faster-moving industries like e-commerce, fintech, telecom, and media, the sovereignty premium often becomes untenable unless propped up by regulatory protectionism or direct government support. Enterprises operating at high velocity and low margins face an impossible equation. Choose innovation velocity and global scale, or absorb sovereignty costs that erode competitiveness. As per Greyhound Pulse 2025, 61% of global CIOs and CFOs have reported a measurable 12 to 18% increase in infrastructure and compliance costs attributed directly to sovereignty-related mandates, costs that are increasingly forcing tough trade-offs in technology investment priorities. Sovereignty might feel priceless at the podium. In quarterly earnings calls, however, it carries a cost all too real, and in many cases, one that competitive enterprises cannot sustainably bear without structural shifts in market dynamics. We at Greyhound Research believe that sovereignty will increasingly be a CFO problem, not just a CIO ambition. The ability to fund sovereignty premiums sustainably will become a defining line between winners and laggards. Accelerating ahead of governments, corporates take the lead. Open letters, policy debates, and more all highlight a broader divergence that is now playing out across continents, the widening gap between corporate urgency and political inertia. Governments everywhere, from Brussels to New Delhi to Washington, D.C., have announced sweeping digital sovereignty initiatives, cloud mandates, AI regulations, data localization policies. Yet, as per Greyhound field notes, execution remains universally slow, fragmented, and hamstrung by competing national, political, and industrial interests. Even where policy blueprints exist, meaningful deployment consistently lags behind ambition. Meanwhile, the corporate sector is abandoning patience for pragmatism. SAP is ramping sovereign cloud zones anchored to regulated industries. Deutsche Telekom is embedding sovereignty guarantees into contractual SLAs with hyperscalers. In India, Airtel's Nextra data centers are expanding sovereign hosting offerings ahead of government certification frameworks. In the UAE, G42 and other players are hardwiring sovereignty protocols into cloud and AI deployments without waiting for legislative frameworks to be finalized. A growing cadre of mid-sized SaaS vendors across Europe, India, and Southeast Asia are redesigning platforms to offer sovereign native options, not because regulators mandated it, but because enterprise clients demanded it. As per Greyhound field notes, CIOs and CTOs across banking, healthcare, defense, and public services globally are now refusing to shortlist technology providers unless sovereignty compliance is demonstrable at a technical and contractual level, not simply promised in policy statements. While policymakers debate and delay, corporate architects are laying sovereignty foundations with code, contracts, compliance artifacts, and data governance blueprints. The scaffolding of digital sovereignty is not being legislated into existence. It is being coded, contracted, and commercialized, built by those who must operate in fragmented, sovereign-first markets today, not tomorrow. We at Greyhound Research believe that sovereign resilience will be engineered first by enterprises, not by states. Market-driven architectures will outpace policy frameworks, forcing governments to regulate realities they did not create. Innovation behind walls, a price to pay. Isolation in pursuit of sovereignty has an unintended consequence. It strangles innovation. Cross-border collaboration fuels creativity. Sovereign AI models trained solely on national data pools struggle with diversity, nuance, and adaptability. R&D ecosystems that thrive on global datasets, peer-reviewed openness, and shared research break down when data, models, and even engineering talent are trapped within borders. As per Greyhound Pulse 2025, 68% of global CIOs report a direct slowdown in AI, cloud, and IoT innovation rollouts driven by compliance with fragmented sovereignty requirements, a slowdown that materially impacts enterprise competitiveness in emerging technologies. Even China's formidable domestic AI ecosystem shows cracks, lagging in multilingual processing, struggling with edge case robustness, and increasingly siloed from open innovation communities that fuel global adaptability. In India, early-stage sovereign cloud initiatives are raising questions about potential future fragmentation as enterprises prepare for compliance with evolving national mandates that may diverge from global interoperability norms. The consequences of sovereign isolation are not just technological, they are human. As per Greyhound field notes, CTOs across multinational firms express growing frustration that developer mobility, access to cross-border talent pools, and open-source project participation are all becoming more restricted in sovereign-first regions. The walls are not only being built around data, they're increasingly being built around minds. The private sector offers a cautionary parallel. Even Apple, long admired for its design excellence, has in recent years faced growing criticism for turning its tightly controlled ecosystem into a walled garden that some argue now stifles innovation. What began as a strategy to deliver quality and security has, in the eyes of many, calcified into protectionism, limiting creative evolution. Governments must heed this lesson. What works for securing control in the short term often suffocates innovation in the long term. Innovation cannot bloom in walled gardens. It requires messy cross-pollination of data, of talent, of ideas. Sovereignty may secure control, but if pursued narrowly, it risks impoverishing the very creative lifeblood upon which true technological breakthroughs depend. We at Greyhound Research believe that sovereign walls not only isolate data, but also starve innovation. Leadership must resist equating control with capability and design ecosystems that enable diversity without compromising compliance. Enterprises in the Crossfire, a fragmented reality. For global enterprises, the rising tide of digital sovereignty is not theoretical. It is operational, daily, and expensive. Architectures must now be modular and regionally compliant by design. Vendor relationships must be continuously re-evaluated for political and regulatory risk. Data governance must assume fragmentation, not integration, as the baseline. As per Greyhound field notes, multi-cloud resilience projects have accelerated by an average of 18 months across Fortune 500 firms purely due to sovereign compliance concerns, with CIOs now treating sovereignty as a primary risk variable alongside cybersecurity and supply chain fragility. Europe's Gaia-X evolution offers a telling microcosm. What began as an effort to create sovereign, interoperable clouds has resulted in a complex, hybrid model, neither fully independent nor fully global. Similarly, enterprises must now embrace hybrid risk models, balancing regional compliance with global operational excellence. In practical terms, sovereignty fragmentation forces enterprises into increasingly complex operational redesigns. Global cloud deployments are now being split into region-specific clouds, each requiring distinct compliance certifications and governance frameworks. AI models, which once could be trained and deployed globally, must now be retrained or fine-tuned separately for different regulatory zones. Vendor contracts, previously standardized across regions, are being renegotiated locally, often under sovereign law frameworks. Even security architectures, traditionally focused on technical threats, must now adapt to political and regulatory exposures, building sovereignty resilience into identity management, encryption, and audit controls by region. Per Greyhound field notes, one APAC multinational recently delayed a $400 million cloud migration for 9 months due to sovereignty certification gaps in their preferred hyperscalers' regional operations. Such stories are not outliers. They are becoming the new norm. As per Greyhound Pulse 2025, 76% of global CIOs now cite operational complexity, the need to run multiple regulatory compliant architectures simultaneously, as the most pressing architectural challenge arising from digital sovereignty demands. Enterprises are now playing chess across split boards. Every region a different game, every move a different rulebook, and every missed move carries both technical and geopolitical consequences. We at Greyhound Research believe that operational sovereignty will emerge as the new CIO battlefield. Enterprises that cannot modularize architectures, contracts, and data governance will lose the ability to scale safely across regions. Greyhound CXO Playbook: 10 strategies for leading through digital sovereignty. The old CXO playbook was written for a flat world. The new playbook must be written for a fractured one. As sovereignty pressures rise, CXOs must embed resilience and strategic realism into their leadership agendas. 1/build for regulatory elasticity, not uniformity. Assumes sovereignty fragmentation is permanent. Architect cloud, AI, and data platforms for modular compliance and regional flexibility. 2/demand technical proof of sovereignty. Challenge vendor claims rigorously. Seek evidence, infrastructure control, data jurisdiction, contract governance, not marketing promises. 3/treat your technology stack as a political asset. Every vendor decision now carries geopolitical weight. Manage technology portfolios with political risk as a first-order consideration. 4/cultivate geopolitical competence within technology teams. Embed political literacy into CIO, CTO, and CDO organizations. Ignorance is no longer an option in a sovereign world. 5/invest aggressively in vendor diversification. Avoid single cloud dependencies. Build vendor redundancy as a core resilience strategy, not an afterthought. 6/architect data governance for fragmentation. Regionalize data governance models without losing enterprise-wide visibility and security control. 7/prepare financial models for sovereignty costs. Budget for sovereignty premiums across infrastructure, compliance, staffing, and risk insurance. 8/stress test operations for sovereignty shocks. Regularly simulate political and regulatory disruptions in operational resilience exercises. 9/embed sovereignty risk into board-level risk registers. Elevate sovereignty to the same strategic visibility as cybersecurity, ESG, and compliance risks. 10/lead with strategic realism, not sentiment. Sovereignty is a structural shift, not an ideological debate. CXOs must lead with clear-eyed pragmatism, not slogans. Conclusion: the new CXO mandate. Digital sovereignty is not a passing phase. It is not a transient policy trend. It is the scaffolding of the new digital world order, and it is already under construction, code line by code line, compliance form by compliance form, contract by contract. The Iron Curtain of the 21st century will not fall with a dramatic crash. It is falling quietly but relentlessly, redrawing supply chains, redefining risk frameworks, and rewiring the architecture of enterprise technology. Those enterprises that recognize this reality early and embed sovereignty resilience into every layer of their strategy, architecture, and operations will find a way to thrive amidst the growing patchwork of sovereign markets. Those who cling to the dream of seamless global uniformity will find themselves boxed in by borders they cannot bypass, governed by regulations they cannot outrun. We at Greyhound Research believe that the winners of the next decade will not be those who scale fastest, but those who adapt smartest. Those who understand that sovereignty is not an exception to digital strategy, but its new foundation. The stakes are no longer theoretical. The future of digital enterprises will be written or unwritten by those who choose realism over rhetoric, architecture over aspiration, and resilience over nostalgia. Analyst in focus: Sanchit Gogia. Sanchit Gogia, or SVG as he is popularly known, is a globally recognized technology analyst, innovation strategist, digital consultant, and board advisor. SVG is the chief analyst, founder and CEO of Greyhound Research, a global, award-winning technology research, advisory, consulting, and education firm. Greyhound Research works closely with global organizations, their CXOs, and the board of directors on technology and digital transformation decisions. SVG is also the founder and CEO of the House of Greyhound, an eclectic venture focusing on interdisciplinary innovation. Copyright policy. All content contained on the Greyhound Research website is protected by copyright law and may not be reproduced, distributed, transmitted, displayed, published, or broadcast without the prior written permission of Greyhound Research or, in the case of third-party materials, the prior written consent of the copyright owner of that content. You may not alter, delete, obscure, or conceal any trademark, copyright, or other notice appearing in any Greyhound Research content. We request our readers not to copy Greyhound Research content and not republish or redistribute them, in whole or partially, via emails or republishing them in any media, including websites, newsletters, or intranets. We understand that you may want to share this content with others, so we've added tools under each content piece that allow you to share the content. If you have any questions, please get in touch with our community relations team at connect@thofker.com.